In before we go live here? Okay.
We're going live right now.
All right. Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back for our 132nd, I think, Zoom call on the Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition. We have Wendy Liederman with us, one of our co-hosts, Mike Hirsch, Myla Reeson, and Steve Caruso is our lead engineer for starters. We have a packed agenda, as always, and we have 26 people with us to start. We're going to start with a brief message. I'm just going to talk very briefly about Donald Trump, but unlike every other newscast in the country, we're going to go straight to Wisconsin. And we have some very, very important people with us. ANDREA MILLER from the Center for Common Ground, Norm Stockwell from the Progressive, and Tom Nelson from the hardcore there in Wisconsin. We're then going to be joined by a friend of mine, David Saltman, who has an amazing career in the mass media, and we're going to want to discuss very briefly, but we will discuss it on later calls, who the Democrats could nominate. David's just entering the room here. I'll get him in here. Who the Democrats could nominate that would be most likely to win, and we'll come to back to that in a minute. We're going to be joined by BRYNN TANNEHILL, who's going to be talking about, as she did last week, about issues having to do with trans people. And I want to point out, as someone who can actually recite the Second Amendment from heart, you can't beat this. All these gun lovers now actually want to ban a group of people from owning guns in America. They actually want to ban a group of people, and those of you who can guess what group it is will come to you very quickly. There's also talk out there about a progressive agenda that we want to briefly touch on. There have been some posts. Hi, BRYNN, we just talked about you. You're going to tell us the mystery group that all the Second Amendment people now want to ban from owning guns. There is a progressive agenda out there that we want to briefly touch on. And then in the second hour, which we usually do for environmental stuff, we want to discuss in detail with the great activist Linda Gunter about Germany. Germany has announced that officially, as of April 15th, they will be shutting their last reactors, which means that the fourth largest economy in the world will be out of the nuclear business, which we hope to make the fifth happen very quickly in the fifth largest economy in the world, which is California. So there we go. We also have a repeat from last week. Wendy, what is the name of the group that we're going to have in with us that was with us last week?
Thank you. And sorry, I'm a little dark here. I'm trying to fix that. It's Living Earth Movement, and Ignacio Castuera just got here. So welcome to him. We'll be hearing from them in the second hour, and they're about diplomacy for the sake of climate change and survival, and how we need to get together as a planet. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. And you look a little dark. Did you get sunburned at the beach or something? All right. So let's do this now. The number one, the whole, I got to tell you, all the networks, every one of the networks that I was watching this morning followed Trump's cavalcade from Mar-a-Lago to the West Palm Beach airport. Watch the plane take off. I mean, it was really mind-boggling. It was like he was being inaugurated, but here he essentially being defenestrated. Fox was ranting and raving about what a travesty it is. MSNBC was jumping up and down with excitement. CNN was somewhere in the middle. Really a pageant to watch the coverage, but saturation coverage of Donald. He had like I think he had 10 limousines drive to the West Palm Beach airport. He got on a big private plane that said Trump on it, which is as big as any airliner I've seen. We watched it take off. I mean, come on. This is really mind-boggling. So what can I tell you? But we're going to start with what's really important, which is Wisconsin. We are honored to have the great Andrea Miller with us from the Center for Common Ground, the centerforcommonground.org, which is coordinating phone canvassing into the state of Wisconsin. We're then going to go to Norm Stockwell, the publisher of Wisconsin's most important publication, Progressive Magazine and progressive.org. And Tom Nelson will join us from the Grassroots in Wisconsin. I think I can very briefly, I'm sure most of you know, there is a Supreme Court race for the state Supreme Court. The court now is divided 3-3 between MAGA Republicans and somewhat progressive people. And Jane Protasiewicz, did I get it?
No,
Oh,
but that's close enough.
well, we know it's not Antetokounmpo. So Janet
Protasiewicz. Protasiewicz. Yeah,
she's being called generally as Judge Janet.
Judge Janet.
Judge
Yes.
Janet.
And there are reasons for that.
Yes. So she is running from the left, and a guy named Riley is running from the right.
Dan Kelly.
Kelly, my God, Dan Kelly is running from the right. Welcome, Dennis.
Glad you're not writing my scripts.
Right. And the balance of power in Wisconsin is at stake, and it actually this Supreme Court race, state Supreme Court race, could decide the presidential election in 2024 very easily, because Wisconsin is a swing state. If the Republicans control the state Supreme Court, they will vastly fewer people of color and youth will have their votes counted in 24. There's no doubt about that. And we're also talking about at least 2 seats in the US Congress. Wisconsin has 8 congressional seats. The state is evenly divided, but the Republicans have 6 of the 8 congressional seats, and the Democrats just get 2. We have very little doubt that if there were fair districts in Wisconsin, which a remade Supreme Court could do, at least it would be 4-4. So there are 2 congressional seats at stake, and of course the question of women's rights, and a whole lot more in Wisconsin. So at this point in time, Andrea Miller is coordinating people calling in from all over the country to remind people that there is a race. The final day for voting is tomorrow, and there are groups in Wisconsin that are providing transportation to the polls.
Yep.
So Andrea, with that, and then Norm, and then Tom, please go ahead. Andrea Miller.
Well, thank you very much, Harvey. I'm going to make this quick because you guys have a lot of business tonight. We are calling the Black voters in Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is 92% white. So that means 8% of the population is not white. So we are calling the Black and the Hispanic voters for the very simple reason that the party is not calling them at all. Most of the groups that are making calls to Wisconsin are calling, utilizing the phone bank set up by the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. They are calling Democratic and Democratic-leaning consistent voters. Now, when we look at Black voters and Hispanic voters, they are not consistent voters, and a lot of that is voter suppression. And B, many of them are not registered as Democrats. So that means nobody is calling them. So at this point, yes, our phone banks are on our website, centerforcommonground.org/phone banks. And we use a system called PDI. You will love it. The entire system is branched. So when you talk to a voter and you ask, well, now, has the voter voted, and do they want to vote on election day? We have an election day script. If the voter says they've already voted, we've got a script for that. Now, so far, as of yesterday, or as of Saturday, that was the last day of early voting, roughly 380,000 people, 380,886 people in Wisconsin have already early voted. We concentrated on Black voters in Milwaukee. And we are delighted to say that 8,365 have already shown up to either early vote or vote by mail. So this is about 10% of the registered Black voters in Milwaukee. And Ed Spendell made a point of bragging last year that they were able to successfully disenfranchise 37,000 Black and brown voters in the city of Milwaukee. When we talk about voter suppression, the great state of Georgia has drop boxes. The great state of Wisconsin does not have drop boxes. In the great state of Georgia, anybody can drop off a vote by mail ballot or any other person. That is not true in Wisconsin. Each voter must drop off their own ballot. So we've been telling people where maybe there are disabled people who live in their households, call the county clerk. Let them know that you have a disabled person in your household and you will be dropping off their ballot, and get them to make a note of it. You don't want to go down with that ballot and have them refuse to accept it. So thank you, Harvey. So again, our phone banks, centerforcommonground.org/phone banks. There will be a phone bank running tonight starting at 6:30 Eastern, and we will be running a phone bank tomorrow at noon, looking to get the last possible voters out and getting them to vote.
Fantastic. I want to point out that quote you gave was from a member of the Wisconsin election board, a Republican, who bragged about suppressing enough votes in the 22 election to have flipped the U.S. Senate seat.
Yeah.
Because we had a MAGA Republican. We are nonpartisan here, but this guy's one of the worst human beings to ever walk the face of the earth, Ron Johnson. And he should have been easily defeated by Mandela Barnes, but the Republicans very proudly suppressed the vote. And this is the kind of thing that's at stake in this Supreme Court race. Someone texted Andrea that the link on the Center for Common Ground phone banks may be having problems, if you want to double check. But the phone bank for the Center for Common Ground is in the chat, the link. And if you can hang on, Andrea, let's let
Nope.
Do you got
I just tested it, works just fine.
Okay, wonderful, fantastic. If you
Yeah.
got a couple of minutes to hang on for the great Norm Stockwell.
Yeah.
Norm, how long have you been publisher of the Progressive now?
So I've been publisher at the Progressive for about 7 years now. Before that, I worked in community radio here in the state of Wisconsin for more than 30. And so Harvey, you and I know each other wearing a couple of different hats. But yeah, I mean, I think that it can't be understated how important this race is. And we've seen a lot of national media attention in the last couple of days. The New York Times several weeks ago dubbed it as the most important race of the 2023 electoral year. And very fine piece in the New Yorker magazine by Dan Kaufman last week. There was also a piece just yesterday by Heather Cox Richardson. And in our own magazine, The Progressive, we've been covering this most recently. Ruth Conniff had a very fine piece in our current issue of the magazine that's just come out. But you know, the issues in this race go far beyond the state of Wisconsin, and he touched on that a little bit. But just to reiterate, the redistricting that took place in this state following the 2010 census made the state imbalanced politically, made the state legislature imbalanced, but it also makes the congressional seats imbalanced. And then those maps were again redrawn following the 2020 census and made worse. And that was because of a decision that took place in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. If the court changes in its ideological balance, that is, if we change from a conservative to a liberal, as they say, majority in the court, then very likely there will be a challenge to the gerrymandering here in the state that'll be brought to the Supreme Court. And if they rule that those maps are unfair, it means we could see a change not only in the legislative districts within the state, but also in the congressional seats, which could affect control of the U.S. House of Representatives potentially. Similarly, in 2020, Wisconsin Supreme Court heard a challenge to the voting in Madison or in Dane County and in Milwaukee County. And, you know, as we just heard, the percentages of voters of color statewide are fairly small, but in Milwaukee County and in Dane County, they're much higher. And so those votes were being challenged by the Trump campaign. The Supreme Court decided by only one vote to not accept that challenge. And that decision was a procedural decision. It wasn't really about the merits of the case. So again, if a case like that were to come to the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 2024, the ideological balance of the justices on that court is going to make a huge difference, possibly in the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. So these are no small stakes. In addition to that, another case that will almost certainly come before the court in the very near future is Wisconsin's 1849 prohibition on abortion. As many have pointed out, that law was written before there was an understanding of germs as the cause of disease. 1849 was some 70 years before women had the vote in the United States. And so that law right now is the standing law on the books. And it's been described as the most regressive law in the country in terms of the possibility of a woman obtaining a safe and legal abortion. And so that's something that will be challenged in the state Supreme Court and will be voted on by whoever is sitting on the court after this week. So, you know, all of these things are just crucial pieces of the conversation, but also the issue of voter suppression, because many of the very, very stringent voter suppression laws that we have in Wisconsin, like a very harsh voter ID law, like the elimination of drop boxes, like the fact that you cannot put into the mailbox a ballot for anyone other than yourself. Those are all things that were affirmed in some way by the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. So it cannot be understated how important this election is. And we're expecting, you know, a very good turnout in the voting tomorrow. But there's also been an awful lot of money spent on advertising and persuading in this election. It's right now the highest ever spent on a state Supreme Court race prior to this one was $15 million spent in Illinois a number of years ago. This race has now probably topped 45 million, according to analysis by Politico. So, or excuse me, by wispolitics.com. So I think that, we're seeing a lot of dark money coming in to influence voters in these last days of the election. You can't turn on your television without seeing a string of ads. But the most important thing, as always in elections, is that person-to-person contact. Some of the kinds of work that Common Ground is doing, some of the kinds of work that other people are doing to go and talk to folks on the phone, knock on doors, and make that personal connection to people to talk about the importance of this race.
Fantastic. There is a group in Wisconsin. We had them on couple of weeks ago, Souls to the Polls. There are a couple other groups out there, and but Andrea's, for people, most of the people on this call are from out of state, and I did this in Georgia 22. I linked into Andrea's website. I probably made about 20 calls, 18 of which went to voicemail, which is fine. It's like a postcard or any other communication. And I think I mentioned I did get one of the two people I got live was trying to run a daycare and kept yelling at people to stop, kept yelling at these kids to get down and stop hitting each other. That was really fun. But at any rate, it's definitely worth doing. And here's the Souls to the Polls. And thank you, Steve. And let's do it. Tom, no, thank you. Norm and Tom Nelson, you are somewhere in Wisconsin. You want to give us a heads up on what's going on? I got to unmute you here. Should have unmuted you before, my fault. Go ahead.
Tom, by the way, was one of the candidates running against Ron Johnson in the Senate race in 2020. So kudos to him for taking on that challenge as well.
Okay, Tom, go ahead, please.
All right. Well, first of all, it is a great honor, not to digress too much, the founder of the No Nukes concert, one of the greatest concerts in modern day history. So what an honor. Okay.
I just one of many, but thank you. Thank you.
That's great. So I'm up here in Northeast Wisconsin in the Fox Valley. I'm currently the Outagamie County executive, which is Greater Appleton area. And this is considered to be the breadbasket of independent persuadable votes. And so this is a county, I'm actually up for re-election tomorrow. This is a county that if you get about 45 or 46%, a statewide candidate is going to win. Now, the Supreme Court candidates going back about 10 years, the progressives, the liberals have either won this county or have been very competitive. And that's important because we are easily up here the most organized and better organized between the Democrats and Republicans. I mean, the Republican Party here in Outagamie County is a shell of its former self. And so we've got that going for us. But I think what you see up here, and I just want to make a point about this to a broader issue. Norm spoke about everything that is at stake here, and winning this seat in the Supreme Court is like hitting the trifecta. It's like winning the legislature and the governor like that. And it's even more significant because if you go back through COVID, especially, a lot of the legislating that took place was done in the Supreme Court. So during COVID, the Republican legislature spent more days in court suing the governor, suing the Democratic governor than actually legislating. So all we have to do is come up with a few test cases. And just like that, it's going to be the equivalent of passing a bill and having the governor sign it. So you can see how this is going to begin with ballot access, making sure that we are protecting folks' right to vote, going on to the 1849 law. And then hopefully this would be the coup de grace, and this would completely eliminate and take down Scott Walker's legacy is defined unconstitutional Act 10, which is where it all began. And it would be just the birthplace of progressivism. And Norm can talk about this, and Andrea can talk about this. What's so exciting about this is that there's really never been a race where you can really see crystal clear, not just the kind of agenda that you would have implemented or attempted, but you can see very clearly, here are the concrete issues, and here are the concrete likely outcomes. A woman's right to choose, perhaps labor rights, ballot access. And we know that's going to redound benefit not just here in Wisconsin, but to everyone in 2024, because this is the battleground state in the country. And of course, here in the Fox Valley, the breadbasket of independent voters, persuadable voters, this is the battleground area of the battleground state.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that. And I remember in 2016, there were serious questions when Trump carried Wisconsin, that those of us with a history in election protection, it was really a fishy election in 2016.
Mhm.
And I'm not convinced that Trump was the legitimate winner in 2016. And a lot of the dirty business will be up to the Supreme Court going into 24. So thank you for that. Anybody wants to ask questions, go ahead and raise your hand, please. Danette asked, is it safe, Andrea, if Judge Janet wins, does that bode well for 24? And Norm and Tom will let you answer after Andrea. Anybody has anything to raise about Wisconsin, please raise your hand. Go ahead, Andrea.
Yes, I believe it bodes very, very well for the rest of the country. It gives progressives a boost. It will give us a boost here in Virginia. Remember, Virginia, our entire state legislature will be up for re-election this November. So it does nothing but help because it puts wind back in people's sails.
Norm, and then Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things to realize is that even though we have this partisan gerrymandering in place here in Wisconsin and have had since 2011, the fact is, in statewide races, we have seen Democrats consistently win. Governor, lieutenant governor, state treasurer, attorney general, secretary of state. And so, the balance is pretty clear. Wisconsin may be a divided state, but it's a divided state that favors progressive values. And that's been true historically. I mean, even though we have had, our Joe McCarthy's, we have also had our Fighting Bob LaFollett's. And the thing about this Supreme Court race is that it will affect 2024 in three very significant ways. As I mentioned before, there's going to be challenges to the gerrymandering that are going to come before the court. There's no question about that. There's going to be the potential in 2024 of challenges to the election, which would also go before the court. And so you want to have, decent people making those decisions. And I think that the idea of it being, inspiring to see a change like this, to see a progressive beat an arch conservative. And there's no question that Daniel Kelly is an arch conservative if you look at everything he has written and said and done in his life. Although during this campaign, he's been taking the position that, as a Supreme Court justice, he would not let his personal views influence his relationship to the law.
Well, but at least he's got a sense of humor.
But I mean, I think that he has the same sort of originalist interpretation of the Constitution in the state of Wisconsin as many of our Supreme Court justices at the federal level have on the U.S. Constitution, and that is this notion that whatever they said in 1848 is still true today. And so I think that that alone gives you a a window into how he would vote. But I think that if you look at his past statements and his past associations, I think that you have a pretty clear idea of how he would vote as well. Janet Protasiewicz, who is running on the progressive side of the ticket, is very clear about what her personal views are. And she also says she would decide cases fairly as they came before her on the court. And so I think that in a sense, both she and Kelly are saying that they would decide cases based on their merits. And I don't think that, his attacks on her for saying what she believes in are any more valid than the fact that he doesn't say what he believes in, even though he acts on it over and over again.
Well, here's a quick question. I'll get you a minute, Tom. If Judge Janet wins and the state court overturns the gerrymandered maps, will that happen quick enough to affect the 24 election?
Yes, in fact, it could happen as soon as like August. I mean, it could happen very quickly. The case would come before the courts. If they throw out the maps, it would go back to some sort of mapping plan, which is yet to be determined. But last time, we had two sets of maps, one prepared by the Republican state legislature and one prepared by an independent mapping commission created by the governor, and they each presented their maps, and the court ruled what they called a least change option. The Supreme Court ruled that they wanted to keep the maps as close to the bad maps that they already had as could be done. And so it ended up falling into the hands of the Republican legislature, and they presented these maps that are even worse than the 2011 maps. So I think that, that decision is one that would happen very quickly and would definitely be in place prior to the 2024 election.
Well, I think especially at the progressive, you need to look at what happened in Ohio. And Steve Caruso can testify to this from the Columbus area. The Supreme Court of Ohio, there were two referenda in Ohio where the public voted very strongly against gerrymandering. It all came to the Ohio Supreme Court, which had a Republican majority, and the Republican Chief Justice threw out the bad maps and said, you have to draw better maps to the legislature. But the legislature is completely gerrymandered, totally dominated by the Republicans, like Wisconsin, and they refused to draw new maps. So if she wins tomorrow and you believe you're going to sail in to a new era of safe maps in Wisconsin, you need to look at what they did in Ohio. It's absolutely shocking. I mean, the legislature basically told both the public and the Ohio Supreme Court to take a hike and put in their own maps. So please look at very closely what happened in Ohio if she wins.
Well, and of course, each state has different rules about how the maps are created. And some of our neighboring states years ago have adopted independent, nonpartisan mapping commissions as a way of doing things. And
Right.
we don't currently have that in place here in Wisconsin.
Well, just for the record, by the way, we have 50 people on the call. And I do want to mention we're not meeting next week. Next week is Easter Monday. And Passover both, so Jesus will be rising and the bread will not be. We'll meet in 2 weeks. That'll be April 17th. Somebody hadn't heard that before.
It's
Okay.
great. I'm a pastor's kid, so I really appreciate that. That is brilliant.
Oh,
I'm not sure if that's
okay.
original, but that's really good.
Yeah, it's been around a while. Anyway, the gerrymandered situation in Ohio is really crucial to look at. And the standard, by the way, has become, and I love to mention this because my favorite Republican was largely responsible for two referenda in 2008 and 2010. California voted overwhelmingly for a state districting, nonpartisan state districting decision to do the legislature and the congressional districts. And it passed largely because it was backed by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who put $3 million of his own money in. And I've mentioned this before, but one of the reasons that Michigan also got a nonpartisan commission is because Arnold had an affair with his housekeeper, and they had a son, and he went to the University of Michigan and he brought his father in to help with redistricting. So maybe if you had another kid that went to Wisconsin, you guys would be in better shape. Anyway, Tom, can I call on you, Tom? Did you want to say something? Go ahead. Tom Nelson?
I mean, Norman and Andrea have been really good on this. And I think just to clarify, Norman made a point about how each state has its own background, its own process. And I think what's important here is that 2 or 3 years ago, the Republican legislature passed a resolution, I think it was a joint resolution, that would guide any type of disagreement on the maps through the Wisconsin court system going to the state Supreme Court. So the path is pretty much clear. And so I think that we are closer to having a just answer, a just resolution to this issue than I think most folks, perhaps in the state and around the country, actually realize. But I want to make just one quick point. Good news and bad news. The bad news is Wisconsin might lose its designation as the battleground state in the country. The good news is we are on the cusp of, if you do the math, we went from like about a +2 or a +3 Democratic state to like +0.5 or just down the middle. Well, there's a really good argument that what made that difference, that put it slightly in the Republican column, has been all the voter suppression. That has been all of the ballot access issues. And so if Janet wins and you start changing these rules, if you start changing these precedents, I believe, I hope, and I predict that 2024 and 2026 and on, you're going to see Wisconsin move from the expectation of a purple state to maybe more of a shade of blue. And so I cannot stress, I mean, this is an April election, it's a spring election, but the ramifications for this state, for the country, for the future of the progressive movement could not be more dependent on one political event. So again, really.
Well, let me ask you very quickly, the procedure for redrawing maps. If she wins and the maps go to the Supreme Court, what happened in Ohio was the legislature pulled all sorts of dirty tricks to kill the new maps, as has happened in Florida with the El Jefe DeSantis there. He single-handedly put in his own maps, which he sat there and drew himself. So I don't know what the procedure is in Wisconsin, but we'll certainly be following it closely. And you may, at the progressive norm, take a look at what's happened in Ohio. And somebody should do an overview of redistricting overall in light of what happens in this race. And if you read what happened in Ohio, it just makes you want to throw stuff. I mean, their bald-faced election mongering is just hard to imagine, but it happened. So anyway, forewarned is forearmed.
Well, in Wisconsin, when the Republicans had control of the state Supreme Court, they put their eggs in that basket because they thought that
Yes.
that was better than letting the governor or independent commissions get at it, and now they may reap the results of that.
Yeah, I mean, Norm is exactly right. I mean, we are playing on their terms. This is the process that the Wisconsin Republicans created. This is not us going in and inventing something from whole cloth. They have paved the road. They have put up, the signposts, everything. It's just a matter of us taking control. And I don't think 10 years ago that they were going to predict that we were going to win 1, 2, and hopefully 3 out of 4 very competitive Supreme Court races. And there was a lot of reason to discount that because, you've got the turnout, the electorate in the spring is a lot more conservative. And I, I think in this case, we really caught them. I think we caught them off guard. And I think the combination of the success we had in 2020, 2022, the success we have, in my humble opinion, that we are blessed to have Ben Wickler, who is, I would say, one of the best state party chairs in the country. And I know that, what he's been doing now is so much different than what we've had in the past. I think that has a big deal to do with the success we've had so far.
Fantastic. Let me call on Justin. I've got to go let my daughter in the house, but Justin, go ahead, please. Get you unmuted. I'll be right back. Steve, can you unmute Justin?
So the day after Palm Sunday, I've got some fronds behind my head right now, but wanted to carry on the continuation of how we win elections. And I think there's a lot done for get out the vote. There's not necessarily a lot done to follow up on measuring the voter suppression that did happen. We talk about it, people forwarding it, people bragging about it, but we actually need to quantify it. And so someone has come on this call previously, he's not here today, but Daniel Wolf of AmericaCounts.us has developed both actual vote for us to check up on the polls, the poll tapes, the results from precincts, to cross-check whether those are accurate, as well as to actually talk to voters on a better than exit poll to get demographic information to see who was actually represented and not represented in the votes. So we can actually truly get to the bottom of the malfeasance that's happening, not just the top line, but also the bottom line. So Stephen put the website in the screen share. I'm going to put the link in the chat. But Andrea, if you've got some folks who are on the ground or know anybody who is, please tell them to use actual vote and want to vote. Thank you.
Logo, you're muted.
Anyone else who wants to talk about Wisconsin, get your hand up, and we'll do that. And before we move on, we're going to talk to BRYNN TANNEHILL about some trans issues, and then David Saltman is going to reveal who will be the Democratic nominee in 24. I'm sure you're all on pins and needles about that. Andrea, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just typing in the chat. We work with Emily over at Scrutineers. We don't have anyone on the ground and we do have one person, our IT director is there, but our on the ground people are in the Southeast, where there are large Black and brown populations. So that's normally where we work. So yes, we do the work before people vote, while they're voting, and then we come back and do the after the vote. Yes. You're muted, Harvey.
Centerforcommonground.org. My kids are around the house here. Centerforcommonground.org. Norm at progressive.org. You want to throw in there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, people should keep an eye on this race and how it turns out. And we really applaud all the work of all the groups that are doing this kind of on the ground organizing, because there's no question that face-to-face conversations with people far outstrips television advertising in terms of not only convincing voters about issues and also learning about issues from voters, which is equally important. But also, it's much more effective in getting people out to the polls than battering them with TV ads between their favorite other distractions.
Right. I must say that I'm sure many of you, I was outraged, actually. The Democratic Party never ceases to amaze me. I've gotten at least 5 emails raising money for the Democratic Party for U.S. Senate in 2024 with no mention of the Supreme Court race. I mean, it's outrageous. I did get one, which I also found outrageous, from Cory Booker, talking about the state Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. He's from New Jersey, and asking to split the donation between Judge Janet and him. I mean, come on, man. You know, you got this race coming up tomorrow and you're going to run again in next fall and you want to split. I mean, okay, don't get me going. So, okay, well, listen, we will reconvene in 2 weeks. We're going to go through the end today, of course, but we'll have results to talk about in Wisconsin. And by then you guys will have researched all the other gerrymandering fights. I mean, it's outrageous. Wisconsin, like Ohio, is more or less 50-50. They're claiming now Ohio is 54-46 Republican, but that's after the discount for suppressed votes in Cuyahoga, Franklin, and Hamilton counties. So, you know, and yet the Wisconsin legislature, like Ohio's, is a supermajority Republican. And they are not shy. These guys, they don't care, you know, they're going to vote whatever they think they want to vote. So let's watch this closely. Any last words from the three of you? Andrea, I will be going to Center for Common Ground. And I had a good time doing it for Georgia and we won. So let's do it.
I'm leading the phone bank tomorrow afternoon. So if you're available tomorrow afternoon at noon Eastern, I'm going to be leading that phone bank.
Okay, very good. Norm, good to see you.
Thank you very
Tom,
much.
thanks for checking in from Wisconsin. Jeffrey, we'll get to you later if that's okay, please. I know these guys got to go and we got to get moving on. So again, everybody, we will not meet next week. Hopefully, week after, we'll be having a repeat discussion about Wisconsin and charting out the future of new maps in Wisconsin. So thank you, all three of you. We'll see
Thank
you.
you.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks, and good luck tomorrow. Okay, we're going to talk now with BRYNN TANNEHILL, who was with us last week as well on trans issues, and then we can go to the great journalist Dave Saltman, who has a report on who is if it's not Joe Biden, who is the likeliest nominee for the Democratic Party in 24. I'm sure you're all on pins and needles. But BRYNN, I understand there's a new twist in gun control in America. Do you want to talk to us about it? Oh, hold on, you're still muted. Sorry. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks for having me on again. So the latest is that Republicans have decided that gun control isn't bad if it's applied to trans people. We've heard Tucker Carlson and some other Republicans, even before the shooting in Nashville, were proclaiming that maybe we should take guns away from trans people because they're all sickos and mentally ill. These calls got louder after Nashville. There was some legislation being introduced, which was withdrawn. They've decided that it's kind of difficult to say guns are the problem, guns are not the problem. But we're going to be paying attention to the legislative landscape next year and see if this stuff gets revived. But the fact that you had Republicans talking about banning people from having guns, that's an interesting step considering the precedent set in Germany in the 30s, where Jews had their guns taken away and everybody else had more ready access to guns. Which brings me to my PowerPoint presentation today, which looks at the legislative and legal summary for trans people in the US and what's motivating it, if I may.
Logo, you're muted.
Okay, 5 minutes will be great, BRYNN. Can you do that?
It's pushing it hard. Okay.
I will go.
So,
You can do 10. 10 will be all right, but go ahead.
all right. So this is a quick list of the types of bans. What's going on right here is there is a concerted effort to use the legal and legislative system to push transgender people out of society, marginalizing and minimizing their presence to the point where they simply disappear. This is outdated. We are blowing through 500 at the moment. This is a heat map. Texas is the worst, but Tennessee and Kentucky are falling close behind. This is a map of where the risks are. Deeper blue is better. The only states with comprehensive protections for trans people at the moment, though, are California and Massachusetts, which include non-extradition. That's important. Why? because red states are starting to do things that would make it such that people who kidnap trans children and haul them back to a red state cannot be prosecuted, or that they're making it illegal for people to flee to blue states to get abortions or to flee persecution in red states as a trans person. We're seeing medical care bans across the entire United States. Most of them are focused on trans youth. However, a lot of these bans are including things that make it impossible for insurance providers or doctors to provide care to trans adults, even if it isn't really a ban, by manipulating liability law, or stating that insurers, if they provide healthcare to trans people in other states, can't do business with the state. That would be Tennessee. What we're going to see is either insurance companies are going to fold, or we're going to see a bifurcation of the insurance market in the United States, where
Bryn, did I hear you right? Are you saying that in other states, insurance companies are being banned from covering people if in a state like Tennessee where
yes.
they
So the gist of the law is that Tennessee provides health care through Medicare, Medicaid, 10 care. There's a name for their own health insurance, and for health insurance policies for state employees and for contractors of the state. The law that Tennessee has passed says that if a company like Blue Cross Blue Shield provides healthcare for trans people in another state, they cannot contract with the government of Tennessee.
Oh my God. Does everybody get that? I mean, that's complete psychosis. That is really whacked out.
Oklahoma has passed a law prohibiting any medical or professional or business that takes state or federal funds from providing transition-related health care. That means essentially no doctors in Oklahoma will take on trans patients, adult or youth. So the ultimate goal is to ban is to functionally eliminate transition-related health care for trans people, and eliminate coverage for trans people in blue states, as well as things like Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Anthem, Kaiser, all drop coverage of trans people in blue states so that they have access to red state markets. This is going to be real interesting when the state of California says, yeah, okay, fine, you could do that, but you don't get to do business here, which is going to lead to a bifurcation of the insurance markets. Drag bans. These are the places where drag bans are in the works.
Unbelievable.
This gets into some First Amendment issues. The law in Tennessee that passed is on hold at the moment. These are don't say gay and forced outing of LGBT students. Basically, if there's also some other laws that are coming into place that prohibit teachers from using a student's preferred name and or pronouns, even if these students are supported by their parents. Florida's got that one going through.
Wait, is this in effect in New Jersey?
This is proposed in New Jersey. These are just places where it's been proposed.
Okay.
But any place that's on the high risk map, right? Anything that's in red or in dark red or red here, it's probably going to get passed. Okay, there's 453 bills. I'm sorry, close to 500 now, right? So everything south of the Mason-Dixon line, plus West Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri, Iowa, Montana, and North Dakota, they're all probably going to end up with forced outing laws. Virginia, New Hampshire, New Jersey.
What is a forced outing law?
It essentially makes mandatory reporters of anyone, of teachers, doctors, counselors, that if they find out a student is LGBT, they have to report it to the parents, even if those parents are going to take them out on the field and shoot them.
You mean a student who is gay in a school, the teacher has to report that student as being gay?
Yes.
My God.
Even if that means, so that either your school counselor, if they find out a student's gay, and the kid's like, my mom and dad will take me out in a field and they will fucking shoot me and leave the body in a shallow unmarked grave. The counselor's like, I'm sorry, I'm going to lose my license and I could go to jail. So sorry, feel real bad, but professional licenses, criminal charges, bad.
Real quick, Bryn, if one of the parents is supportive and the other one is kind of estranged from the child, do they report to the estranged parent as well, the hostile parent?
Any custodial parent,
That is
which
absolutely.
most custody agreements in the United States today are joint. So this is the goal is to make sure that children never come out because it's just too damn dangerous.
Andrea,
So the blue states are places where it's already illegal for trans kids to play sports at K through college. Red is where there's legislation coming through. Georgia has implemented should be turned to red. This is a little bit old. Now keep in mind these sports bans, they're banning third graders, right, from playing sports on the boys team, even though there's no testosterone involved and the prize is a plastic trophy, participation trophy at the end, banned, right? Just again.
are you saying that girls can't play in boys' leagues and vice versa?
Yep. In most of these states, in all of these states, it bans trans girls, i.e. someone who is assigned male at birth. Most of these laws, it applies the other way, that it bans trans men as well. But there are some that where it only applies to trans girls. So again, bathroom bans. This map is a little out of date. I made it 1 month ago, and I would probably have to add about another 10 states to this, including Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, Oklahoma. South Dakota and Montana have all added bathroom bans to their legislative agenda, which bans trans students from going in bathrooms. Arkansas has the nastiest. Arkansas and Florida have the two nastiest ones, one of which the Arkansas law, which has been amended, would have put any trans person who was using a bathroom. So if you're a trans person, you've done your business, you're washing your hands at the sink and a minor walks in, boom, instant felony, and you're on the sex offender list.
Oh my God.
Okay. Which the goal, trans people never use a bathroom again in public, right? Most of these bans are on schools, state facilities, universities, right? So anything that's a state controlled bathroom. Derecognition. This is essentially, there is no such thing as trans people. There are no gender marker changes. There will be no recognition of transgender identities or of trans people having any protection under the law. This is essentially a Nuremberg law that basically tries to set trans people back under the law to something under rational basis scrutiny, because you can't have a court case for rational basis scrutiny for a group of people who don't exist, right? Which is pretty close to the legal effect of the Nuremberg citizenship laws. Yeah.
Okay. All
This
right.
is bad. Wait, this is more laws that are in play. This is at the federal level, right? These are some legal cases that are going on. This is just what's in the courts right now. And it's bad. Some quotes here. The number one thing I want people to take away from this is the goal, end state goal, is to set that there is the right believes they have a moral imperative to minimize the number of transgender people via government action. And the ideal number of transgender people is 0. How do you get there? You get there by making trans people detransition, flee to blue states, or never come out of the closet, or you imprison them, right? By setting up laws such that they commit a felony merely by walking out of their house, dressed as themselves or using a bathroom. This essentially, you end up with, their goal is to end up looking like Iran with gay people, that they can say, no, there's no trans people in the United States. You don't see any trans people, do you? We don't recognize them. Nobody here is going to say they're trans. And this was, sorry, that's from my employer, but essentially where we are at is we are somewhere at the beginning of stage 7 of genocide. And the worst part is there's nothing we can do to stop it at the moment in most of the red states that are enacting these laws. It is effectively a lost cause. And my recommendation to most trans people in those states or parents of trans youth is to get out. It doesn't matter what it costs. When I brought this up with my wife, and some people, well, that's not fair. I said, well, you know, what about their livelihoods? What about their families? What about everything else? And the answer is, Harriet Tubman didn't leave with very much coming out of the South either. So
Okay.
that's the 10-minute version.
That's fantastic. We want you to come back again in a couple of weeks and revisit this. You did a tremendous job on this PowerPoint. Thank you so much, BRYNN.
You're very welcome.
And it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. And of course, everybody who says, well, it doesn't affect me, I'm not trans, you need to remember that quote from the German guy who said basically,
Martin
I
Niemöller.
wasn't a Jew, I wasn't a union guy, I wasn't this or that. And then finally, when they came for me, there was nobody left to protect me. So let's do very quickly, Mila. We're at the top of the hour. I want to thank my Progressive Radio Network listeners. We've had a full hour here. We're concluding with this hour with BRYNN TANNEHILL and issues of trans. Our second segment, we're going to talk about the likely nominee for the Democrats in 2024. And then we're going to deal with the Living Earth movement and with the shutting of the nuclear plant in Germany. But thank you again, BRYNN. Go ahead.
Welcome.
I have one quick
Mila,
question.
go ahead.
And you may have already addressed this, but I noticed there was a 270 to win on each of your slides of the map of the states, and I'm wondering what the significance of that is.
270 to win is an electoral college map that lets me change the colors of states really easily. I just use it as a graphic aid.
Cool.
And that's the website.
Well, it's a great presentation, BRYNN, and we want to revisit these issues in greater depth in 2 weeks. So come back to join us if you would. Okay, and we're at the top of the hour. This is the 132nd, I think, Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition. We have another hour that we're going to hang out and maybe even longer. I'm glad to see people starting to join me at the beach. Lynn Surum, Danette, there's a different beach view, but all of you are welcome to come to the beach if you wish. I want to say hi to Hetty Tripp there in Minnesota. And I just want to put in, and Tatanka, good to see you. I actually believe that the Wisconsin Supreme Court race will turn on whether Aaron Rodgers actually votes in Wisconsin. That was a bad joke for all you football fans. Okay, we are now gonna, in our second hour, we're gonna start with my buddy David Saltman. David is a distinguished journalist, has been involved in more than 200 documentary films, among other things, CNN, Fox, all the majors. There's not a network I don't think that David Saltman hasn't worked for or with. And David is also a Tai Chi master. And in his Tai Chi, he has meditated and discovered if Joe Biden doesn't win, who will be the likely Democratic nominee and one that could win in 24. David, you want to reveal the name?
I'm going to reveal the name, but I want to, if I may, just slightly correct what you said. It's not that I'm going to announce the person that you challenged everybody to come up with last week. You said that, and I've just seen a poll that shows you were correct. 53% of Democratic primary voters would like someone else besides Biden to run for the nomination. And you said, okay, but who have you got? Who has got the gravitas and the stature to win? And I actually messaged you last week, but you got barraged. So I'm here to reveal, or let me say, I hope to announce the candidacy of the one and only person that will beat anybody, any Republican that they can field. May it be, you know all the names. I'm not going to even dishonor this broadcast by repeating them. So I would like to announce the candidacy of the one and only Michelle Obama.
There you go. It's decided. Okay.
A lot of hands to go up and say, but she won't run. And I have an answer to that, but since nobody's asking the question, knock yourselves out. Let's all vote. I hope somebody on this call knows her very well. I don't. And will convince her that now is the time.
All right, so
There
we have stunning
We
silence.
gotta go high.
That's right. And Dave and I had deep discussions. David actually did some research on it. The polls seem to show that if she announced, and she's gonna have to do it soon if she's gonna do it, or she's not gonna go up against Biden. It would have to be following an announcement from Joe Biden that he won't be running.
This would have to be orchestrated. Biden would make a beautiful exit, hand off the torch to the next generation, and there we go. And he's going to be 82 years old in 2 years. It's just a bad idea, even if you love the guy.
And I will say this, and David and I have had, I say, deep discussions about this, but because I sit on an elliptical machine and watch the news for hours on end, and I flip from CNN to MSNBC to Fox, there seems to be a consensus, at least for the moment, that because Trump has been indicted and the polls show the Republicans rallying around him, that the likelihood of him becoming the nominee, even if he's in prison, is very, very high. So then the question is, if Joe Biden, and we can't speak to this, if Joe Biden stepped down, as we know, we have progressives who are actively campaigning to get Joe Biden to not run again. But there's no presentation of who would run. And there seems to be a very strong opposition to Kamala Harris at this point in time. Everything I've read has been pretty negative. So David and I took on the task of thinking who would be the likely a winner on the Democratic side, and the only name we came up with was Michelle Obama. So let's open this up, and I know Hetty is shaking her head. I can guarantee you one thing: it will not be Hillary Clinton. So, Justin, did you want to speak on this? Then Dorothy and Lynn. Justin, go ahead. And after this, we're going to go. Ignacio Castuera has been extremely patient. Thank you, Ignacio. I hope you're enjoying your time with us. We still have 46 people on, for God's sakes. And then we'll go to Linda Pence-Gunter, who's going to give us the report on nuclear and the joyous anticipation of the shutdown of the last reactors in Germany. Hopefully they will shut before Zaporizhia explodes, but nonetheless, Linda always has great things to say about it. So, Justin, then Dorothy, then Lynn, please.
All right. So the candidate I'm going to propose, Marianne Williamson.
Okay,
Actually,
there you go.
one of the big feature people for Stephen Donziger, who we've talked about in the past as being a very great climate activist and also an enemy of the corporate state. Chevron tried to prosecute him directly, bypassing essentially all due process of the United States. So she's one of the few that's actually put him out there, and she talks about various kinds of issues. So there's.
I'm glad you mentioned. I love Marianne Williamson. She's a fabulous person. We've done a few events together. She actually wrote an introduction to my one book of poetry. She's a fabulous person and would make a great president. So we'll put her name in the hopper as well. Thank you for that, Justin. Dorothy Wright.
Well, don't ask me about Marianne Williamson. I tell you, she runs these races to get material for her books. And she's a very good friend, of Howie Klein's. And I said to Howie, she's just running so she could write a book and make money. And Howie poo-pooed that. And when I called him a few months later, I said, well, am I right? I think she came out with a book, didn't she? And he said, yeah, it's sitting on my desk.
All right.
So
what do you think of Michelle? Do you have an alternative?
Why in hell would Michelle Obama subject herself to the racist attacks from the right wing?
Really?
She already lived through 8 years. She would have to be out of her mind, and she doesn't want to be. She doesn't even like politics. Well, too loud. I'm sorry.
All right.
My ideal would be if AOC would be named vice president instead of Kamala Harris, and then Joe Biden would quietly retire after a couple of years, and she would become president. There's a big article in Politico today about how she's gone from being an outsider to an inside player. She actually had a military jobs fair at a school in her district. So she's getting ready for something. If it's not the Senate, then why not vice president?
Dave, did you want to, you raised your hand on that?
Yeah, I agree that she has expressed in the past, Michelle Obama, her reluctance to run again, but that was then, and this is now. And she just did an interview that came out a couple of weeks ago, which indicated that she might be willing. I can read from it. I actually have a transcript of it in front of me, but the gist is that in the past, she didn't want to subject the children to that miserable life. You know, that grandma had to move in. I mean, it was a disaster, not a disaster, but it was rough. But now that, you know, the children are going on 25 and 22. They live in Los Angeles, and Michelle and Barack live in Washington and up on the Vineyard. It's a whole different ball game. And she, let me just read you this one quote from her that just came out, like I say, a couple of weeks ago. I've had to learn how to determine when my fear is rational and when it's just me not wanting to do something that makes me uncomfortable. And I think the biggest example is when Barack approached me about running for president of the United States. Yeah, that happened. But he played I wouldn't say he played a dirty trick, but it was like he said, a lot of people want me to do this. It's going to be hard. And I know this is going to be a lot on your family. And if you don't want me to do this, Barack, then we just won't. And I'm like, really? You're going to put this on me? And he's like, no, really, really. So I had to sit with that choice and think about it. And for weeks, I walked around with the notion of that in my head. And my first gut instinct was no, no way, no, heck no. But then I had to say, well, what is that coming from? And if I'm honest with myself, it's coming from the fact that I didn't want change. I didn't want discomfort. It was all about me. It was all about not wanting to do something that would put me in an uncomfortable place. And then I had to ask myself, was that a reason to impact what could be a historic thing? Would I want to live in the legacy of many of my ancestors?
Wow. Okay. A dramatic reading. Thank you, Dave. Dave, unlike me, Dave actually does research and came up with that passage. Lynn Feinerman, did you want to jump in on this, Lynn Feinerman?
Yeah. Am I
You're good. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay. You know, I want to suggest that maybe we need to look at the entire ticket, and that maybe we should do something like present a ticket that is co-presidency rather than a president and a vice president who basically disappears and, you know, then reappears to say something like, don't move here. You know, we need to know that both our president and vice president are going to be really powerful and really viable. Why not something like, you know, just, it's so difficult for for the majority of this nation to accept somebody on her own, like Michelle Obama or any woman or woman of color. So why not combine with somebody who's got really good ideas on some things, and maybe we don't know what his ideas are on others. And I'm going to suggest Sheldon Whitehouse. He is so freaking stereotypically white. He's so white male. And he does have he does have a problem that he belongs to some white club in Rhode Island. And I don't know what his real feelings about race are. And I don't really know. I know he wants to cut the military budget, which is really good, but I don't know much else about him. So I'm wondering what David Saltman thinks about him and about my suggestion.
Dave, do you know
I don't know that much about him. Listen, I think these people, I would love to see Bernie Sanders as president. I would
So
love
would I.
AOC as president. They're all fabulous people, but they don't have a chance. They don't have a chance in this particular election, in my opinion. So I think that the reason I like Michelle, aside from just that who doesn't like Michelle, you know, she could win. She's got the star power, and none of these other people do. I'm so sorry to say, in my view. That's all. These people, I think Marianne Williamson, I voted for her in the primary last time. I think she would be a great choice. Deepak Chopra would be a good president, but you know, he's not running and he wouldn't win.
Amara Reason?
I have something to say about Sheldon Whitehouse, and it's a tragic flaw, which is that he claims to be a climate leader, but he is promoting nuclear power. And he has a history of co-authoring legislation to fund a new generation of nuclear power plants. And he has gone on record saying that we need nuclear power in order to address or avert our climate catastrophe that we're now in. So unfortunately, that's a big no for me. And I hope he'll come around. But
Well, maybe he
so
can do
far-
some microdosing. That would help. Ruth Strauss and Dorothy Reich. Ruth, are you unmuted? And then Dorothy.
Okay, yeah, I'm unmuted
Okay.
now. Mila, thank you for pointing that out, because maybe you should have a talk with him, you and Harvey, because he
At the
really
White
is.
House.
No, he's really great on all the other issues, and he is, you know, he's been really outspoken in Congress, and he comes in with, you know, the whiteboard like Katie Porter does. I didn't know what you're saying, Mila, but that's good, and he needs schooling by you and Harvey. I don't think Michelle Obama would have a snowball's chance in hell. You know, unfortunately, no matter what. And I'm kind of like, you know, like Harvey, you know, I wish somebody would appear that I think really could, you know, win over Biden, but I don't know if there is. Not that I'm in favor of Biden. It's just that I don't know who the alternative is, like Harvey. Thanks.
Thank you. Tatanka? I don't know what, Dorothy. Okay. Go ahead, Tatanka, then Dorothy.
I just want to share a process that's been going on for 2.5 years with the joint efforts of the Romero Foundation and the Dolores Huerta Foundation, which is to condense the entire progressive agenda into an accessible, understandable document to the public of the United States, and then to run a progressive Congress. The original idea was to run AOC, but with the present situation being locked thus far within the Democratic establishment party, is to, during this race for at least a whole year, draft people to represent 15 cabinet positions and 8 administrative agency positions like the CIA, and then what a progressive agenda would look like. So have a Democratic secretary, have all these people work with the media for a whole year on an educational campaign, and then during the primaries to have the whole team show up. Now, we're not waiting for whoever may be the president. It's such a fluid situation in the next 18 months. But if we can do a significant educational program, and we're not ready right quite yet, but when we are, I will have Danny Sheehan and maybe Danny and Dolores be on to talk about this on the program here.
Well, that'd be great. We look forward to it. There's a bunch of links I had lined up. I don't think we're going to get to it for progressive agendas. So maybe in 2 weeks we can do that. And I know that AOC has been a big part of your discussions. So, but
and
I will say,
of course, of a lot of it, I mean, Bernie has been incredibly prolific about the whole thing.
Bernie should have been elected in 2016.
Sure, he should have.
No doubt about it. And you know, I see a lot of shaking heads, and we would have had a much different country. So,
and I also want to say that Dolores shared a poll with me. She's on the board of People for American Way, a recent poll, not just of progressive young people like Sunrise, but across the United States, that showed that 18 to 36-year-olds are pro-Biden strongly, but only on the understanding basically that this is running a progressive for 2024. So that whole notion of somehow having some force to beat Trump, but at the same time not give in, and from our point of view, the present climate policy is, turning nuclear into green and all this junk that's going on. We need a strong climate policy for climate restoration and going straight through carbon zero by 2030, which is what we're doing here in California with the legislation out of Romero Institute. But this needs to be national policy, because the present policy, even coming through the Democratic administration at this point, will leave us all without a viable planet. Thanks.
Very well stated. Thank you. Dorothy, and then we're going to move on. I will say that having watched Fox and these other networks for the last time, they are really moving strongly to put Marjorie Taylor Greene as Trump's vice presidential candidate. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. Dorothy, go ahead, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Joe Biden and AOC against Trump and MTG. That would be so incredible. But I will remind us all that guess who's running? Gavin is running.
Yeah.
He's running all over the country, and he's doing all these attack ads on DeSantis, and he's getting high profile. I remind you that he's tall, he has good hair, he's not bad looking, he has all the attributes of a president, except he just vetoed the cryptocurrency bill, which kind of got me mad. Sheldon Whitehouse is an interesting character. He's the one who went after all the dark money coming into the Supreme Court, and he wrote a book on it. So he's a good guy, except for the nuclear, and I guess he joined the wrong country club. But he's an interesting character. But
both him and
of course, Gavin and AOC would be an interesting pairing too.
We could overnight go from Trump versus Biden to two other candidates. DeSantis, God help us. DeSantis has raised more than $30 million, by the way. And I hope tomorrow in the arraignment, DeSantis offered to not extradite Trump from Florida. And if I was the judge tomorrow, I would forbid him legally from going to Florida. Because if he's going to run to Florida and have the dictator there not allow him to be extradited, he's a flight risk. So there you go. That would be my line for the judge tomorrow. Let's see if he does it. Anyway, does anyone else have to say about this? David, thank you for, we know you're angling to become her campaign manager, but thank you for this report. Okay, we're going to move on. Linda, can you stay with us? We have one more guest. Great. So I want Wendy, if you can introduce our guest from the Living Earth movement, that will be really great. Jeffrey, we know you have your hand up. We're going to get to you in a while, okay? Thank you for that. Go ahead, Wendy, and give us the Ignacio from the Living Earth movement, if you would.
Thank you. And I have just a really quick point about China, because a lot of the things that Living Earth movement is talking about has to do with China. Welcome, Ignacio. It's great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ignacio, for sticking with us.
Just really quickly, I just want to bring everybody hip. Like a lot of this Trump talk is going on, I think, to distract us from some of the moves that Harvey brought up last week with the BRIC nations, with Russia and China meeting, but also this week, China was able to broker a peace deal between the Shiite and the Sunnis, bringing Syria and Iran together for a ceasefire, which, I mean, if there's any positive, it shows that people are willing to negotiate. So hopefully we can get on that train. And also other countries are starting to trade outside of the dollar as currency. Brazil is going to a local currency. China just bought liquid natural gas in the yuan, and Saudi Arabia is discussing selling oil outside of the dollar. So it's just very, very important that we get on the diplomacy train before it takes off without us. Thank you so much, Ignacio, for being here. Thanks, Harvey.
Okay, Ignacio, we had a representative from your group last week who's, I believe, considerably older than you.
He was my professor. He was my professor, and he's really the brains and the heart behind the organization. His name is John Cobb, and he loved the whole discussion. You know, the fact that he wasn't able to say much, that didn't bother him at all. And he feels that your group is doing great work, and so he encouraged me to come today as well. And like him, I have enjoyed the discussions that you had. I think that what's going on in Wisconsin and what is going on in terms of the potential Democratic candidate for president, all of those things are very, very, very important. And I agree with many of the positions that were here. I just want to tell you that the Living Earth movement really is a creation of John Cobb. And John Cobb needs to be, I urge you, really, it's impossible for me to really summarize what he has done, but I urge you, just go to John B. Cobb Jr. To Google and read that excellent article about him. I mean, on Wikipedia. And if you Google him, of course, that will come up. And he is now 98 years young, and with a brain that keeps on operating at well, I wouldn't say 100%, and he would tell me I would be lying if because he still forgets things here and there. But his thinking ability is really right up there with most people. And he is a radical. He is a radical in that he wants to go to the root causes of all the problems that we find ourselves in. In terms specifically of Living Earth movement, I got to tell you that he was the first theologian, Christian theologian, to respond positively to the issues raised by those who warned us about the problems about climate change and Earth and all of that. So in 1970 is the date of publication, but he wrote it during the latter part of the 1960s. He wrote a book called "Is It Too Late?" And sadly enough, it was too late then, and it's even later now, but still it's a book that needs to be read, because he really wants to bring people of all faiths and good faith to respond to the problems about the environment. And at this point, the enmity between two nations, the United States and China, is a great dark cloud over any kind of attempt on our part to really do something for Earth. Because if somehow China and the United States go at each other instead of cooperate with each other, it's curtains. It's curtains for all of us. It's curtains for the environment and all that. So he was invited to do 3 sermons via Zoom. That's one of the good things, one of the kind of a sidebar, you know, every dark cloud has some bright sides to it. And one of the things about COVID is that it allowed us to get into what we're doing right now, into Zooming and to doing a lot of virtual meetings. So John was able to preach at a church in New York via Zoom. He did 3 sermons. And in the last sermon for the benediction, he said, imagine President Biden and President Xi cooperating with each other to care for the Earth. So that led then into the creation of the Living Earth movement. That is the basis and the foundation of the Living Earth movement. The idea that people of power need to cooperate with each other in order to save the Earth. Because if the big powers of the Earth do not stop their enmity, if we continue on the Ukraine, if we go to war over Taiwan, any of those things, you know, we can go. Well, I don't need to convince you. I think you know that that's the truth. So, Living Earth movement is trying to to help people to see China as a competitor, but not as an enemy. And so we are now in the process of producing 1 to 1.5 page papers, trying to distill as much as we can about issues that might lead people to be more willing to look at China as a worthy competitor, but not as a deadly enemy. And that's basically what we're trying to do. And John spends a lot of hours in front of his computer writing and or participating in Zoom meetings to make sure that that goal of bringing together the powerful of the world, beginning with China and the United States, because they are the biggest powers, biggest military powers, biggest economic powers, biggest polluters in the world, bring them first, but not to forget all of the others. And lately we have been talking a lot about the fact that other countries like India and Brazil, and even the country of my birth, Mexico, they are sounding a lot like Xi, trying to bring about cooperation and bringing about a deal that makes Ukraine and Russia cooperate with each other, and also that makes Xi and the United States cooperate with each other. So the Living Earth movement has a big goal, a difficult goal, but it's one that I think you all have pieces of it. I mean, we don't all have to be just in one organization. I was so glad that I was invited to this, because I have thoroughly enjoyed what you are doing, and I know that every bit of business that you did today has something to do also with the Living Earth movement, because we can work together. We're not working at odds with each other, and we can keep on being just partners, and to acknowledge each other as partners in our business. I'll finish with this. One sign of hope that I feel, and I have promised John, who was my professor, by the way, I'm also a theologian. He was my professor, and I told John that something I said at the meeting that Wendy also attended, that I was going to do some follow-up. Several years ago, 47 billionaires asked to be taxed more than they were being taxed. They asked actually Obama. So there are some billionaires that are aware of the fact that they can do something good. That plus that group of people, 47 of them, plus the 13 peace ambassadors of the United Nations, could make the core of a movement of people that talk with more gravitas, let's say, with more power to their names and all of that, that can talk to the President of the United States, to the senators and all of those other people. I don't want to give up hope. And that's why I told John I will try to ask these folks, see if they can talk with each other, see if we can facilitate their a virtual meeting of as many of them as possible. And if only 20% of those people were to be present, that I think would be a good beginning. And then we can connect with your organization and many of the other organizations that some of us who belong to LEM also participate in other organizations. And I know that's true of you. Yeah.
Beautiful presentation. Thank you. Make sure we have your email. We'll send you the link for these Zooms. You can keep coming back.
Right.
And send the link to other people in your organization.
Right.
That's like something we really need to connect with. Thank you. Ruth
Great.
Strauss, and we'll ask, and then we're going to go to Linda Gunter to give us the latest on the world of nuclear power. Ruth Strauss, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this was just a quickie to follow up on what Wendy did. I found it very interesting. This is a total aside, but that, the Saudis came out today talking about cutting production. And I just wondered if it was, a backdoor way to help Trump and, screw Biden and screw the rest of us. And that was all. I just had that paranoid thought. Thank you.
Well, go ahead, Wendy. Wendy, you've got your hand.
Thank you. Yeah. No, I appreciate that, Ruth. One thing I can say is that the whole idea of see the world when other countries buy oil, they have to trade their currency into the dollar in order to buy oil. It's the world reserve currency, and it's what keeps us ahead. And so there's been talk for like, I mean, I've been following it for like over 10 years. And like 10 years ago, people would call you crazy if you ever suggested that the world might shift off the reserve currency. But slowly people have been, other countries, because we are so oppressive with the power that we have, that other countries have been slowly making moves. And so it's concerning. And I think a lot of this, you know, like they should have gotten Trump on much stronger charges a long time ago, even on treason. And so I think it's a lot of wag the dog stuff kind of going on where they're distracting. But I definitely hope Ignacio stays in touch and we can talk more about grassroots organizing and movement building, because especially with Code Pink and, you know, it's just about this whole violent, you know, and also with what Tatanka's doing with the Danny Sheehan and Romero, because we really need to get together and start to be able to envision a peaceful balance between world powers where we are able to fair trade. We've been at war for over 20 years that we forgot that peace is an option. And we really need to, excuse me, illustrate that vision and put it on the scale for the country, because the currency and the way we go about life is really on the table right now with all these other external factors. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Let me do a quick history thing. The American century was the 20th century. I mean, we became the world's biggest economy in the 1890s. And after World War I, we were the dominant military. And the world has been doing its business for over 100 years on the dollar. But very clearly, the mantle of world leadership, and as we mentioned on this call, is passing to Asia. And the 21st century will be the Asian century. There's just no doubt about it. There's a very powerful historian, I mentioned him last time, named Alfred McCoy. He's a professor of history at Wisconsin in Madison. He wrote a very influential book way back when called The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia. It was a mind-boggling book. Even those of us who were marching against the war in Vietnam had no idea of the substructure of the heroin traffic that was motivating a lot of the war in Vietnam. And he has written extensively lately, this is Alfred McCoy, about the ascendancy of China. And one of the things that the Chinese were wise enough to do is to not spend all their money on the military. And one thing you have to remember about China is that for all of human history, except the last two centuries, because the Chinese, because they were so stable, you know, China has a 3,000-year history. They've only had 10 dynasties, which means the average Chinese dynasty, and that has somewhat to do with geography. If you look at the map of China, it's very insular. It's surrounded by mountains. And they've never really been interested in empire. There's no real history of China going off and conquer other countries, certainly not outside their immediate area. So the Chinese, for the entire history of the human race up until around 1700, were always the richest country on earth, and always the most stable and always the most advanced in many ways, even technologically. But in the 1700s, the West, being a lot more fluid, bypassed China technologically, and they became a prey to the opium trade. You know, the Opium War was fought by Great Britain to continue trading opium into China. The Chinese fought back and tried to ban opium, and thousands of people died because the Brits did not want them to ban opium. I mean, it's ridiculous, but that's the reality. So now, after China's had a revolution more recently than pretty much anybody else in 1949, and we all know what has become. And if you look at the map, the recent détente, let's call it, between Putin and Xi, you know, Alfred McCoy talks about something called the pivot of world geography, where there's a place in Eurasia where you can control Europe, Asia, and Africa. And basically the Chinese are building the technological infrastructure to take over the world. And they're not doing it militarily, although they are building up a military. But, you know, we chose to squander the wealth of the American century on an empire. And the Chinese didn't do that. And now they're building a commercial and economic empire. And as we know, within the last week, Brazil, as Wendy mentioned, Brazil and China have started to do business with the yuan and not the dollar. So go ahead, Wendy.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt because it's beautiful what you're saying. It's really
Go ahead.
important.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I was helping do some research for this project for the defense angle of it, and I realized that the US spends more, we spend 40% of the world's budget for military. Like the entire amount of money that the entire globe spends on militarization, the US is 40% of that, which is 9 times, or it's more than the next 9 countries combined, including China, including Russia. And so if we imagine taking some of that money and diverting it into research and development of things like ceramic solar plates and hemp graphene batteries, and we became the world's leading exporter of supplies to the renewable energy field, then we could not only accelerate the rest of the world becoming not dependent and reliant on fossil fuels, therefore the currency would be a little more mute, we would leverage more against it, but we would also be able to have something else to play and have secure our place in the world markets if we were manufacturing and exporting on a large scale, other than just trying to something unsustainable like military, which could, fall.
And, yeah, you may recall that the Chinese very nearly took over the entire solar industry of the world. They did try to do that, and they basically subsidized and dropped the price of solar panels below cost, and tried to drive everybody out of business. That was what happened with Solyndra. Everybody was screaming at Obama that he blew $500 million on the solar company. It was the Chinese that destroyed Solyndra, and they were basically trying to drive everybody else out of the business. They barely failed. But anyway, Steve Caruso, thank you for that, Wendy. Steve, and then we're going to go to Linda Gunter to talk nuclear. Steve Caruso.
Yeah, China is starting to collect the debt from all these nations in Africa and everywhere else that they've given money to. So it's not just grant. They're not just giving this money away. They're putting these countries in debt, and these countries now are defaulting on these debts. So, where the China and the IMF stand, I don't know. Maybe somebody else can bring that up later, but I'll let Linda take it. She looks like she's been patiently waiting. Thank you.
Yes, I want to actually, Harvey, China tried to take over and run Vietnam and other Southeast Asian nations. And of course, and this is 100% right, they took Tibet, although they all have always claimed that Tibet was, belonged to them. On the other hand, they did not try to conquer countries that are 8,000 miles away, like we did in Vietnam. And they've never sent troops into every country in Latin America. So there is some contrast, but Lynn, you're 100% right about that. Okay, thank you for that. And thank you to the Living Earth movement. Thank you, Wendy, for bringing them. Ignacio, wonderful to have you with us. Extremely articulate, and we hope you'll come back and you'll circulate our link among people in your movement so we can get more people from your movement. That would really be great.
Will do.
Thank you. All right. And again, I want to remind people next Sunday is Easter and Passover and Ramadan. So we will be not meeting next week, but we will meet in 2 weeks on April 17th, and we'll know the results from Wisconsin and take the world from there. Okay, we're joined by Linda Pence Gunter again, our nuclear guru. Linda, I just read that the Germans have announced that they are definitely shutting those last 2 reactors on April 15th. And Zaporizhia, to my knowledge, has not yet exploded. So far, so good. What do you think?
So far, so good. I was trying to think as this conversation continued, what the jumping off point was really to talk about nuclear right at the end of this fascinating dialogue and so many things. And I think, what struck me is something that you said, Ignacio, about our world leaders and their inability to sort of grasp the urgency of so many situations on so many fronts, one of which, you feel like you want to just shake them. Why are we at war with each other, fighting over bits of land when our whole planet is in jeopardy? And what we should obviously all be doing in an idealistic world is joining together as one species and fixing the one problem that we face, actually two problems, the existential crises of climate change and nuclear weapons. And so in my world where I deal with nuclear power and nuclear weapons, I confront this same sort of frustration that how do we turn around the nuclear weapons countries to signing and ratifying something like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is now a law at the UN and has outlawed nuclear weapons, but of course only applies to the countries that have signed and ratified it, none of which are the 9 nuclear countries. And yet it's so obvious that, why would we even contemplate destroying our planet many times over with the nuclear weapons arsenals that we have, as we struggle with trying to save it from the climate crisis. So I'm interested in this idea of how you shake awake these despots that seem to run most of the countries that control the climate emissions and also the renewable, also the nuclear weapons. But as far as Germany goes, I think mostly made a political decision. What they're saying now is that, yes, we're going to shut off permanently as planned, and just a few months later than planned, these 3 last reactors, they will immediately be supplanted by renewable energy, which is happening everywhere anyway, because the prices for renewable energy worldwide are falling so dramatically. The cost of nuclear is so extremely high. So that's all good news. I think you'd asked me to talk about small modular reactors, but I think that's a conversation, a longer conversation probably for another time, although there's absolutely, in a nutshell, there's absolutely no legitimate reason to have small modular reactors at all on any front whatsoever, because they would take too long to get here, they're too expensive, they'd make more waste, they're just as dangerous as the ones we have, and so on. But we can go into more detail with that some other time. So I think, the other piece of news perhaps to report is that the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the UN agency, which is supposedly worrying about Zaporizhzhia and what to do there, but whose mandate is to promote the continued and expanded use of nuclear energy around the world, has actually, I think, officially given up on its idea of trying to get a safe zone around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, which was kind of a pie in the sky, silly, plan to begin with, is never going to happen or work effectively. Neither side engaged in the war is interested really in supporting that. So I think that, the obvious thing that has to happen clearly is a ceasefire, which ought to be the focus rather than shipping yet more weapons over there. One of the other interesting tidbits that's come up, just to sort of throw it in the hopper with everything else,
please,
the decision by the UK government, where I'm from, to ship depleted uranium weapons to Ukraine. That's raised all sorts of controversies about the health and environmental consequences of going back down that path, which we saw happen in the Balkans and of course in the first Iraq War. It's been a really interesting journey to research this, because although the anecdotal evidence on the ground suggests that there are significant health outcomes, negative health outcomes resulting from the use of these weapons, the studies that have been done, and I'm talking with doctors who are involved with, International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War and other groups, the studies that have been done so far, there haven't been reliable studies done that will demonstrate that there is a correlation between the negative health outcomes they're seeing and the use of DU, even though it seems kind of obvious, when you look at what's actually happening in these countries. And so it's really a problematic thing that we're sort of wrestling with, because especially if you're in the medical profession and you're anti-nuclear war, you don't want to go out there with half-baked studies that can be easily shot down that then disprove the point you're trying to make. So there's a long process involved in trying to get to the point where proper viable studies are done that really demonstrate the correlation that is sort of what one would expect. That said it's mostly the heavy metal chemical components of these weapons that are the problem, not the radioactive side of this, which is not so significant. So that's been an interesting thing to look at, but generally,
Well, it's reminiscent of this argument about 3 Mile Island, you know, where they did a great job of not studying it.
yeah, well, they have done some good jobs of studying this, but it's been difficult to make the difficult to stand it up. And I think, you know, it's just that they haven't done enough deep dives in sort of epidemiological studies independently on this issue. We'll probably get there. It's sort of like all those things, you know, we sort of know what the answer is, but we have to be able to have good medical studies to prove it. So
Okay, so let me back up just a minute, Linda, and make sure that everybody knows about DU, because you know, us nuclear geeks, sometimes we forget that other people haven't followed this, but depleted uranium, which among other things comes from the nuclear power industry, you know, after spent fuel is around, is they take depleted uranium, which is incredibly hard, and they make shells of it. And they, with a depleted uranium shell, shooting at a tank or another metal structure will, you don't need an explosive. You just make the shell out of uranium. And then and this happened extensively in the Iraq War, and also in the Balkans, Yugoslavia, as Linda pointed out. And so when they shoot these shells into a tank or something like a tank, the shell basically ignites, and it's incredibly radioactive. And so radioactivity, it's a nuclear weapon essentially, without a nuclear explosion, although it has it comes with a fire. There's not fission, but there is the dispersal and the somewhat ignition, some kind of extremely high heat incident occurs. And this stuff is really deadly, and just on the face of it. Then the question becomes, and clearly it spreads radioactivity where the shells are used. And so parts of Iraq and Yugoslavia, because of the use of this depleted uranium, are basically heavily radioactive. I mean, it's fallout, for God's sakes. And now they want to use the stuff in Ukraine. It's horrifying. Is that a reasonable explanation, Linda?
Well, I've just put some things in the chat because I think not actually. And
okay, go for it.
You know, that's the thing that we have to contend with. That, you know, even the international campaign to abolish depleted uranium weapons does not call this a nuclear weapon. And in fact, specifically because what Russia has said, you know, what Putin has supposedly said in response to this move to move these DU weapons to Ukraine is, well, if you do that, if you give Ukrainians DU weapons, we'll respond with nuclear weapons. And that's seen as a complete mismatch. You know, the toxicity of the DU weapons is coming much more from the chemical content than the radiological content. It's not a fair answer, you know, it's a complete overreaction to say, well, you're giving them nuclear weapons, so now we're going to use ours. Whereas in fact, they're not really classified in that sense, you know. So it's the heavy, and this is actually an interesting component, also things like uranium mining. You know, we talk a lot about uranium mining and the radiological releases of uranium mining, especially through in situ leach mining. But in fact, not only is that the problem, a lot of the problems from uranium mining are heavy metal releases as well. And so those are in some instances more deadly than the radioactive releases. So that's not to dismiss the radiological problem with DU weapons, but it's to say that let's not forget the chemical component of it and the toxicity from the heavy metal component, because that's actually a very serious component of the nuclear fuel cycle, right? It's in DU, it's in what's left behind uranium mines. It's part of the toxicology. And so I think you have to be, you know, it's a longer discussion, but I think you have to be a little careful to say, well, it's like a nuclear bomb. It isn't. But it doesn't mean it's not deadly and not serious and not a major health hazard. But I think we just have to be careful, how we frame it.
Okay. And depleted uranium has been around for a while. And as you say, it's controversial on the health impacts, but just logically, knowing the amount that it is spreading radiation, as Nyla points out in the chat, there's no safe dose. And an adult could walk through a field and the reason there's no safe dose is essentially because of children. There's no, look at these pictures. Oh God, Steve, I can't handle it. Take care of. So the amount, no amount of radiation is safe for a small child. And so any radiation that's spread by depleted uranium on a place where there will be children at some point is problematic, to say the least.
Also, Harvey, I think, there's that sort of compounding factor too. Like, we are all already in a radioactive soup, right? From atomic testing and Chernobyl disaster and everything else. So anytime you add to the load of radioactive doses or heavy metal toxicity, lead in the environment, we know about that in terms of how that's affected children, especially in low-income communities in this country, lead exposure. So anytime you add to it, you're making a bad problem even worse. So there's no excuse to use weapons like this. Nobody in our environment, and movement endorses the idea of DU weapons. On the contrary, it's just, it magnifies what we're already confronting, which is so much pollution and contamination from the chemical industry, the nuclear industry, you name it, from our industrial society. We've exposed our children, ourselves, to so much that to augment the dose is unacceptable.
It's really a mind boggler. Thank you for that, Linda. We do want to have you back in 2 weeks if we can, to celebrate what we hope will be the final demise of the last 3 reactors in Germany, remembering that Germany is the 4th largest economy in the world. And this decision basically to shut these reactors in Germany was made by a woman. Probably the smartest woman ever to run Europe, Angela Merkel. The quick story is, I think I've told it before, but there's a very large anti-nuclear movement in Germany, and they affiliated with the Green Party. And in 2011, early in 2011, they called for a mass rally to end nuclear power. And in between the time they called for the rally and the rally itself, Fukushima happened. And Angela Merkel, who's a chemist, said, okay, I think the message is clear. And they put in a very sane, a very rational, and very successful transition in Germany. It's not finished, obviously, called the Energiewende. And there you go, Steve, you're great. And they've been putting in wind and solar like crazy in Germany ever since Fukushima and their decision to shut these reactors, and they're doing just fine. And they paused it briefly because of the Ukrainian situation, but as best we hope, in less than 2 weeks, the last reactors will be gone for Germany. And I do want to point out, I'm sorry to go on like this, but next door is France. And France was the poster child for the nuclear industry, and they built 50 plus reactors, and they kept bragging about how these were good because they were standardized design. And now they have all these standardized problems in their standardized designs that have forced them to shut their industry, in addition to the fact that the rivers in France are now too hot to cool the reactors. And so more than 30 of the reactors, of the 50 plus reactors in France, are shut. And France is now importing large quantities of power from Germany, which has caused the Germans, being in business, to burn more coal, but not for Germany, for France. And so all these pro-nuclear people are saying, look, Germany shut their reactors and their emissions are going up. Those emissions are for France. Well, anyway, that's the story with Germany. So hopefully Linda, you can come back a couple of weeks. You'll be joined by Anna Georgi, who was just in Germany and who will give us a report. So we're at the top of the hour. This has been another phenomenal call. We still have 33 people on the line. We'll give Justin and Jeffrey a hit. Jeffrey, go ahead, please, for a minute. And then Justin, if you want to get a word in edgewise before we adjourn, please raise your hand. Jeffrey, really quickly, please.
I just wish that I could have said what I wanted to say when BRYNN Tannehill was during her presentation, because this would have been really good, what I was going to say. For starters, are lesbians in danger? Because a family member of mine is a lesbian. For one thing,
we'll have BRYNN back to answer that.
And I even had ideas of how they can, how teachers can lie about that to it, and how teachers can lie about the, saying that they're lesbian, but while still keep their job.
Okay.
And also we might have to be called for another civil rights movement like we did in the 1960s.
I think you're 100% right about that, and I think it is happening. We definitely have an LGBTQ civil rights movement. And by the way, I saw an interview. Somebody interviewed a pro-Trump person and asked, I couldn't make this up. They asked, what kills more, guns or LGBT or drag shows? What kills more, guns or drag shows? And the guy said, drag shows kill more people than guns. So there you go. I think he thought it was talking about drag races, but anyway, Justin and then Mila, and then anybody else want to get in a last word? Please raise your hand. Go ahead, Justin.
So thank you for that reference, Harvey. And I'll bring up another one from the movie Parenthood, the crash test dummy guy who was a drag racer. But look that up. Keanu Reeves actually played crash test dummy. Anyway, but the real point here is, labor rights are civil rights. And that's actually one of the things that France is going through right now. Not just for sex workers, but for all workers, including nuclear power, including museum workers. And so, if we can't have economic independence, we can't have social independence. So the connection back to here is that the military-industrial complex really does capture governments. And Linda said it right about that. That's why we have not just nuclear waste, but heavy metal toxicity. That's why semiconductor companies are now Superfund sites from the 1970s because of the toxic metal waste. So really what it is we need to get money out of controlling place in politics. And there actually is a movement to do that started, well, it's been in a lot of places, but it actually succeeded against one of the biggest companies in the world, Amazon in Seattle. They actually passed a law that using SEC numbers of influence between 1% from individuals and 5% controlling interest, 5% interest from aggregate, that foreign money has to have no place in political campaigns, including PAC money. And they passed it. Amazon has not succeeded in repealing that law. In fact, for 2 years, they didn't even try. And it's actually being rolled out in other places as well. San Jose against Google, Apple, Facebook, and Twitter. And it's going through the California legislature right now as AB 83. That's Assembly Bill 83 to get foreign money out of politics. But it actually works against a lot of corporations because if you meet that threshold, your entire company can't participate. And that covers 98% of S&P 500 companies. So we do have a chance to get corporate money stop corporate money from poisoning us.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Thank you, Justin. Much appreciated. Mila?
So I have a quick thing to say about depleted uranium, and I wanted to bring up an interesting case that a jury last Friday convicted someone of election interference. But first, depleted uranium. Tungsten is one of the densest metals, and it had been used traditionally for projectiles and for armoring tanks and other things, but it's expensive. but we had a huge inventory of what would be nuclear waste and would have to be disposed of at a significant cost. So the profiteers saved the day, and they decided that they would use this radioactive toxic metal in place of tungsten and save the cost of having to dispose of it. And the Wall Street, the Christian Science Monitor, not long after the beginning of the Iraq War, reported that there was a spike in infant mortality and significant harm to young people as a result of the use of depleted uranium weaponry, which upon impact aerosolizes, and it becomes a fine white powder. And they were finding this fine white powder, which is the residue of depleted uranium, the radioactive toxic residue, all over the open air markets in Baghdad and other places where these horrible weapons have been used. So you might not say they're nuclear, they are radioactive, and there is no safe dose, as she repeated. Now, the other thing that I wanted to mention was that on Friday, the United States Attorney's Office from the Eastern District of New York held a trial for a couple of weeks, trying a social media influencer who it appears influenced close to 5,000 people to trick these people into texting instead of going to the polls. So this individual, let's see, his name is, no, he's known by Ricky Vaughn. And he sent out text messages using Hillary's logo, using the hashtag I'm with her, and used pictures of Black women holding Hillary signs and being in support of Hillary and saying, avoid the polls, it's too much trouble. You can text your vote in, and just text Hillary to this number, this fake account number. That was in 2016. About at least 5,000 people actually followed those recommendations by this individual, and he was convicted this past Friday of election interference, and he will be sentenced to jail, possibly as many as 10 years in prison in this coming month. So stay tuned. Let's see, he'll be sentenced soon. So we'll have to check back in when we come back from our Easter, Ramadan, Passover break.
Well, thank you for that. Maybe he and the Donald can share a cell, and they'll certainly have a lot to talk about. Thank you for that, Myla. Lynn Feinerman, and then Wendy. Lynn, are you unmuted? There we go. Okay.
Okay,
You
thank you. An update,
Yeah.
just an update and a question. First of all, the Supreme Court ruled that they would not hear or take an interest in, as I understand it, the case of Steve Donziger in relation to, just so that people know, the fact of his having been persecuted by Chevron and private attorneys hired by Chevron through the government in order that they would not be challenged to pay what they've been ordered to pay in an Ecuadorian court system. I was given to understand that the two dissenting votes against this were an outraged Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. And I'm like, what? Did everybody else, I couldn't find it online. Did everybody else vote against hearing Steve's case or against ruling on it? Does anybody know?
I don't know. We've been inviting Steve to come on. I did talk to him. He said he'd come on, but I've never heard back from him again. We would really like Steve Donziger. And I did see somewhere someone talking about an out of character vote from those two conservatives. Does anybody have detail? I'll go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. Yeah, no, thank you so much for bringing that up, Lynn. I knew there was something we were forgetting. It happened in the beginning of this week. And yeah, the Supreme Court had a chance to take the case and decide whether or not basically Chevron overstepped, and if it had any jurisdiction, and all this money that was going to be paid. And you're right, all of the liberal judges declined to hear the case. The only two, Gorsuch, I'm not completely surprised about, because he does sometimes err on the side of the Constitution with like giving PR voters' rights back, like he's had historically does his job. But yeah, Sotomayor, Jackson, all of them. And Kavanaugh was a surprise as well, because I mean, is he even a real person? But yeah, all the liberal judges declined to take the case, and it's just such a blow to the freedom of press. You can imagine what would happen to Assange if he came here. But I mean, the people of Amazon, or I'm sorry, of Ecuador, the Amazon in Ecuador have been suffering for over 20 years, more than that. But this case is going on where he got restitution from Chevron to be able to give people, like, they're getting cancer. Their entire ecosystem has been decimated by oil spills. And this was Texaco that did it. And Chevron bought out Texaco and still continues to do this. And the whole justice system has sided with this corporation to be able to prosecute a lawyer for bringing justice and just getting back the livelihood and finding guilt in this genocide that's happened. So this is a huge case. Thanks for bringing that up, Len.
Yeah, thank you. Marla, you want to raise your hand?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. And that is that some of you may recall that a while back, Donziger spoke about the fact that he had appealed to Jerry Nadler, who was the chair, the train's going by, if you can hear it. Sorry, spot loaded. Okay, so Gerald Nadler was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and Donziger had appealed to him, but we found out, or that, I guess via Donziger or his supporters, that Gerald Nadler had a son who was a corporate lawyer for Chevron. And unfortunately, Chevron seems to have quite a lot of influence on the Democratic corporate establishment, and as evidenced in this extraordinary failure to hear this very important case.
Unbelievable. Justin and Wendy again, I think we're going to wrap. It's 10 minutes past. And again, we will not meet next week, but we will meet the week after. Go ahead, Justin, and then Wendy.
Yeah, so some context on this. The liberals are voting in behalf of big oil. They're basically telegraphing their support. Why? Because there's deals going on between Jared Kushner and the Saudi crown prince, for controlling the oil market. They don't want any sort of manipulation ahead of 2024. So that's why they're going along with this now. As far as Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, they're providing the same basic arguments that are being set up for the Harper versus Moore decision out of North Carolina, to basically give state legislators unlimited ability to override even themselves and their own delegations. Plus, they also want to cover the whole idea that the president cannot delegate to any other officer. He must have every major decision go through him personally. So, yeah, that's their crazy.
Well, hopefully we'll get Steve Donziger on with us. Hopefully he'll still be free. We still have 27 people, which is the amount of money, the average dollar amount of a donation to Bernie Sanders. Wendy, do you want to have the last word here?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick point about the nuclear. Two things real quick. One, I think we should use the rest of this hour, whoever's hopping off, to try to make phone bank calls for ANDREA Miller. I'll put the link in the chat. You have till 8 o'clock Eastern, I think, maybe 9. And then also just the fiscal year NDAA, which was our defense spending budget, $30.3 billion for national security programs in the Department of Energy. Okay, let me say that again. National security programs in the Department of Energy and the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board, and then another $378 million for defense-related activities. So the line between Department of Energy and Department of Defense, like, doesn't, that was last year. This is now 2023, and this is what we're doing. And there's actually certain minimums that Biden is calling for depleted uranium to be produced by the Energy Department to supply for these other energy related, defense related activities. So just like here, there's black ops that we're doing with energy that we're using for defense, and too bad. So that's where we're at with this Biden administration. So we need a progressive revolution. Let's start by making phone calls for ANDREA MILLER. Here's the link I'm putting in the chat. Love you all. Have a good night.
And Ron, thank you so much. And Ron Leonard, you joined us late. We're happy to have you with us. And I know you're following the national attack on renewable energy, and maybe we can rejoin that battle in 2 weeks. Are you good with that? Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes.
May I have the last word, actually, please?
Very quickly.
Well, I want to agree with Harvey. We need to move on and move forward on solar energy.
Absolutely, and it's really under assault. We're passing a landmark in California where they're doing everything they possibly can to kill solar. Jeffrey, we're going to give you a word here, then we give Disney the last word. What did you want to say, Jeffrey?
But before I do, careful with that. The CBS has a strong copyright infringement on there.
Okay.
So you might not.
All right,
And since
go
we're
ahead.
live,
What
so
did
it
you
might
wanna
not be
say?
a good idea to do that. Anyway, I was gonna say, you think you'll set up those questions I asked about when I was gonna ask about for BRYNN TANNEHILL.
We'll take a look, and we'll deal with them in 2 weeks. And we thank you, Jeffrey, for